So to look at this, what do we mean by all execution public? Well, we're going to televise all our executions on public TV, prime time. Of course, we're going to have serious warnings to say that any children need to stop watching now. We protect our kids from most sorts of the harshness of the world. Why should it be any different? We wouldn't show a child read violent films, so we're not going to show them an execution. We feel that this is sort of in line with how society works generally, like sort of age restrictions on games films. We don't see any need to break it here. But now what we're going to do, to the voting public, we are going to show them the full extent of what carrying out an execution looks like. Why do we want to do this? Well, as a proposition, we actually believe that carrying out the death penalty is so abhorrent and so morally wrong, we have a duty to make society aware of what is going on. Okay? And by showing them every gory detail from start to finish, we then have a scenario where people are properly aware of what's happening. So, like, if we take an example of, like, say, North Korea.
Point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
Why is it morally wrong?
Well, that's what I'm going to get into in my speech. Why we feel that society taking a life is wrong in this instance when it's not in the defensive state. But getting back to my idea of like sort of apathy to these sorts of scenarios again. So if you have a situation in North Korea, X 100,000 people are in concentration camps. Why isn't there a huge fuss about it in the world? Because it's not in the public life. People don't see it every day. But by bringing society face to face with every gory detail, by having it watched as a person is led into a room, strapped down into a chair, a needle placed in their arm. Maybe they missed the vein the first few times, they have to keep on finding it. And then a poisonous substance is pumped through their body, destroying this human being, and as the light rains out of them, we then view that we bring it to the front of the society to show them what will happen. No, thank you. So why do we believe that this is so important? Okay. Well, ultimately, to do this, we feel that you'd have to be certain for the state to sanction taking life of its citizen, you must be 100% confident that they have committed that crime. And we see, even in nations like America, supposed to be land of the free, where it's believed in free speech, democracy, this is so important to them, right? They still get it wrong. So you've got like the example of Troy Davis, where the man probably was killed wrongly. And that's a really important word, probably. I can't prove he was killed wrongly, but I can't prove he was killed rightly. So we have a scenario where we have the potential to kill an innocent human being, okay? And we feel it's tantamount to murder. Right? This person hasn't done anything wrong, because we can't prove that they're guilty. Yes, sir?
So if you think that the death penalty is so abhorrent, why do you not just propose to get rid of the death penalty?
Right. Because we believe now we're giving society the choice, right? If people feel that it is wrong, then that's the conclusion they'll come to. But we're still giving the choice. This is what we view as important here. We're actually allowing them to see the full extent of what's going on. Because we feel actually, at this stage, people aren't really engaging with what's happening. They're not seeing the actions being committed. Therefore, they're not seeing the underlying problem and understanding why this is wrong. By actually showing them a live execution, no thank you. By showing them a live execution, we will therefore have the capability to again make an informed choice, opposed to this being something that's carried out in private, not seen, and therefore not brought to the public light. So what happens, say, if we get the executions wrong, okay? And this is why it's so important, right? What you see is society now watches someone killed on live TV. And as a result, what's the first thing that's going to happen? They're going to lose total faith in the criminal justice system, okay? If that's the case, if you believe there is a legitimate chance that someone was killed wrongly on live TV, are you now really going to have faith in the criminal justice system? Because, no thank you, you just killed someone wrongly, okay? They've made a huge mistake. They've took a human life because there was an error, okay? Now, Amnesty International has a lot of problem throughout the world bringing attention to these cases because they're not seen by people, right? If actually they're seen, you don't have that problem because it's brought to the forefront of society. Now that people are seeing it and they're told, oh, that execution may have been incorrectly carried out, then that becomes really important. You're actually able to show them what's happening. It's very well and good saying, okay, at this point in history, X thousand people, X 100,000, X million people murdered in the Holocaust. That's just a statistic. But then when you actually show a child, no thank you, go on. Everyone can identify with seeing those sort of pictures in a history book, right? And they have a real shocking effect, much more than the statistics. And we feel the same cases apply here, because just opposed to being told someone was wrongly executed, those people have now actually seen what happens when you get a wrongly executed person. They've seen the effect it has, and therefore can identify with the wider issue. So, we feel, I'm not going to take any more points of information, okay? So, what we feel by doing this, we've actually we've given people a choice, right? And this is what democracy is all centered around, a choice. We're now having an issue that isn't properly looked at, we're bringing it into the public debate, and we feel that this is something we have to do, because we feel there's an inherent moral issue with executing people we can't prove 100% have committed a crime. So, I've already said I'm not going to take more points here. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we feel that there's this moral issue, and now, as a result, we have given society a choice. Whereas before it was an issue that wasn't brought to the forefront, we've now actually brought it forward, and we have people who are going to choose. So let's say that people don't want to get rid of it, okay? And let's say this whole idea that I presented to you is wrong, that we are any worse off? We've publicly broadcast them. Society's then said they're happy with it, they're happy to take these risks, that maybe an innocent person is going to be hurt. So we don't see in any way how this motion can possibly hurt. We either get to a point where we aren't in a position where we wrongly can execute a human being, or we get to a point where actually society is happy to take this risk. We're working as a democratic system, we listen to society, and that's what we do. So either way, we don't feel that there's a huge harm by this motion. In fact, there's only potential to go good. That's why we urge you to make opposition.
House thanks that speaker for his remarks and calls on the Leader of Opposition to start the arguments against this motion. Here, here.
Speaker, quite frankly, we're very surprised that this is the aim of the government. They seem to think death penalty is something really, really bad and that you should not probably have it in your society. Although we were all told for this debate, we should all assume that we have the death penalty and it's not discussable whether it's a good or a bad thing, just whether you should televise it or not. Let's take them on their own ground and see what they're doing with this. So they say we need a fully informed public to see what's happening there so they can make better decisions, or they can better identify with that, or they can act as a corrective to the justice system if something is going wrong. That's okay, I'm going to deal with that in just 1 second. After that, I have 3 points to bring into the debate from your position. First of all, I'm going to talk some very tangible harms to the victims and to the families of the members that are actually being executed, so those that actually die in public. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the state and what the state should encourage and not encourage, and if you want the state to be informative towards its citizens, that there are better ways of doing that than the way you want to do that. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about the dignity of people, and I'm going to talk about the dignity that everyone in society deserves and needs to be guaranteed by the state, even if they are the worst, most abhorrent criminal that you can ever imagine that has been convicted and you just want to see them dead. They should die in a dignified way, because we are a democracy that respects human rights and believes in the dignity of human beings. But first of all, a little bit of rebuttal. So they seem to assume that the effect that will happen is that people will be abhorred because it is a very, very bad thing that you're going to see, something that is, I'm going to talk about in my dignity point as well. But we say you cannot calculate the reactions of your public. First of all, it's a lot of people. People react differently to these kinds of things. Some people might actually really be appalled and actually go to the streets and say, this was a human being actually killed, I want to abolish the death penalty, which is great for you because this is what you want. But there are going to be people that are going to laugh at this, that are going to make jokes about this, that are going to deal with this in an inappropriate way because it is not someone they know. There are people out there already who make jokes about genocides, who make jokes about the Holocaust, who make jokes about discrimination against women, against all kinds of people that are actually suffering, that make jokes against people that they know and that they see every day and they see them suffering. There are people that are not that nice as you think they are, and there are people that don't react like that, and there are people that are going to just make fun of that, and you know it's going to be a fantastic treat for them, and nothing is going to happen. On the contrary, we even think that, you know, you're actually going to make it worse if you really give this to those people. Now, and on the other side, we think that if you make people people that appalled about the justice system, then what you're actually doing is you're just making them, how can I say it, you're making them very extreme, because you're giving them a very extreme way of being angry. Those people are just going to be hysteric, because they will feel, I mean, if they feel the pity for this person that you want them to feel, then they will just, what are they going to do? Start violent protests? Are they going to make this a point of the election system? Like, what parties campaign for? Because we don't think this is how the justice system should be run. It should not be run by what people like or don't like. It should be decided by the parties in a more reasonable way and not through emotions. Like, the other side of that is, if you're really, really angry and want to have the death penalty because you're so appalled and emotional, that's not how we, as a justice system and as a democracy, should act upon, just on feelings and emotions that have been incited. So even if what you're saying is working, we don't think that's how a justice system should be brought about and how a government should react when it reforms its justice system. Thank you very much. Gustav, before I come to my answer.
Even though some people might make inappropriate jokes about the Holocaust, we still take people to concentration camps and show them the full horrors of that event. We think that's a good thing to have, on balance, still brings benefits to society.
Yeah, that's easy for you to say because you're just looking at the sites. We can, your analogy would mean that we take people from the public and make a round trip through a prison that is empty and show them a death chamber that is empty. There is no one being put into a gas oven right now in the concentration camp, so it's not exactly the same. You can still do what you're saying to educate the people and tell them how horrible it is. You don't have to actually see actual people die. Thank you very much. The first point that I have are the hearts. We think maybe it's unlikely, but it's still something that would be very horrible to the victims that are still surviving of some kind of a criminal, maybe rape victims, or someone that they have kidnapped for many years, or someone who survived a murder, stuff like that, that you may actually offer this person that you're executing a last platform to maybe insult that victim somehow. If it is someone who's racist, like things that happen in Germany, for instance, a racist group that has been killing immigrants over years, and you now execution them, you give them a last platform to, I don't know, make some kind of a statement before they die and inflict a last insult on those victims that have already suffered enough, and make that publicly so everybody can see it, and maybe even incite further followers that are also racist or something like that. So we see that's a relatively cruel harm to the people that have survived such horrible crimes. The other harm that we see is on the other side, the family members of the person that is actually being killed. First of all, it is going to be public. That means your anonymity and your identity are going to be public. Even if you don't show the names of those people, you will see their faces. So people will recognize you. That means they will know who your family is, and they will know that you have a criminal in your family. Right now, that is not the case because there is anonymity when it comes to you being convicted or you having a criminal in your family. Your neighbors won't know that. We already know that things happen where, citizens think they need to take control of the neighborhood. They will say, oh, we have a violent rapist and murderer family in our neighborhood. We need to patrol their house. So basically, you're punishing the whole family of someone by taking away their anonymity. What you're also doing is, it's very, very painful. You saw your brother die on television in the most undignified way. People make jokes of that. You have to go through the world after that and listen to that crap. It's absolutely painful and very harmful for those that are left behind. The next point is the state. We think as a state you should keep up a certain amount of dignity, of certain values. And we say that the state should not promote any kind of activity that shows death or torture or undignified dying of individuals and kind of make it seem like an entertainment thing on prime time, on TV that you can just watch and have fun about. If the state wants to inform the citizens, then we think you can show documentaries. There are much milder ways that you can go. As Gustav suggested, you can take them on a trip through the empty death chamber, yeah? You can explain to them what happens. There are already documentaries that do that without actually showing real people dying live right now, and that's we think a much better way of doing that. Kai will talk about dignity, and we think those are enough reasons to just offer this.
The House thanks the Leader of Opposition for her remarks and calls on the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case in favor of the motion. Here you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, the last speaker told us that everyone should die in dignity. People right now who are killed by the state, who are killed by states such as the US, such as Japan, are not dying in dignity. They're dying often in very great pain, in very great distress. They're not killed properly by doctors. It is horrific. Most people do not know this because they don't see it. They have it hidden from them by the state. They don't want to know about it, and that allows it to keep happening. It is disgusting that the state's doing this. It allows it to condone other states to do this as well, and we think that this is completely abhorrent. So, okay, I'm going to talk to you about two things today. The fact that this will mean that people will stop dying in such great pain, in such horrible ways that could be avoided because it's so murky and dark. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about how this will mean better justice for people, make sure cases are properly dealt with. First of all, I'm going to just go through some rebuttal. So the last speaker told us, like, oh, you could just take them around and take to prison. The point is, it doesn't give them the same real-life experience as seeing that person dying and suffering in front of them. You can go around in prison and get told, well, isn't it awful someone died in this chair? Yeah, that probably affects you a bit. What affects you a lot more is seeing them writhing in pain and suffering sat in that chair. That's what we want to end, and that's what we think this proposition will achieve. And we think that also, if I could show on television someone committing genocide, and that would mean that states would actually intervene where their citizens wouldn't want to otherwise. For instance, I think it was very good that the bodies of children who died from gas in Syria were shown on television, because that at least made it more likely for people to intervene. If they'd shown even more of that than they did, perhaps the UK would have gone in where they didn't currently. But okay, we also heard you shouldn't decide such things on emotions. The death penalty is all about emotions, ladies and gentlemen. It's about punishment and getting revenge. It isn't about trying to rehabilitate those criminals because they can't be rehabilitated because they're dead. These are people who quite often have like mental problems in states in which like the death penalty is kind of used. We think that rehabilitation should be something that's used here. We think people's emotions of saying, well, they're a horrible criminal that killed this person, stops that from happening. They also told us that you'll give them a last platform from which they can stand. Within the games you get are better than this anyway. We'd say like, we're also totally okay with like turning the sound off, that would be fine. So they can't say anything, maybe they can stick a finger up, fine. But we think the games are better than that. You also don't want to show hurt the family because you'll remove anonymity. Yeah, like, these people aren't anonymous anyway. Killers who get killed in America are not anonymous. Like, people know about that. We think that's really important because we don't think the state should be allowed to kill people that nobody knows about. If they want to tell us a reason why that would be a good thing to do, so it would avoid the harms for those families, then go on ahead. I'd be interested in hearing it. So, okay, what do we think is the harm right now, ladies and gentlemen? At the moment, the death penalty is done in an absolutely horrific, barbaric way. It's done not by doctors, because doctors don't want to be involved in this whole situation. They do not want to carry it out. It's often done when it's very difficult to be able to find the vein, because these people aren't trained physicians. They only do this once every however many months when someone comes up in their particular state on death row. They aren't trained properly to do it because nobody cares that they aren't properly trained to do it. Another big problem is drug companies don't want to be associated with the whole procedure. That means it's really difficult to get the correct drugs that will actually kill the person painlessly, so states end up going for all sorts of random cocktails that aren't the ideal one to give a painless death. This means that people who die from being given barbiturates or whatever else in death row often go through a really long time of pain. It's horrifically distressful. But this isn't widely reported. People don't really know about it, and yet they allow this to happen in countries because of that emotional response of, well, it's someone who killed someone, so it's okay for them to die. If you force the person to have to confront it, to have to see that person withering in front of their eyes, that's why we want to put it on primetime television. We want to have it as something that people find it very hard to avoid, yes, Sean.
So I suppose the likely outcome of your proposal is that someone will be hired to make the execution process more TV friendly, yeah?
So, like, even if they make it more TV friendly, that would have to mean, like, stopping them withering in pain. If that happens, that's still a gain on our side of the house, and we're happy with that. Like, we're saying that we would prefer if the death penalty was abolished, right? But even if it isn't, if it's at least more bearable for the people that have to go through it, if it's at least not actual torture, which we do not think the state should, like, have in any sort of circumstances, then that is at least better and a gain on our side from the status quo. And we'd like to see why it is that that shouldn't happen, sure.
What do you consider torture?
So I'm going to say torture is prolonged pain, which you can clearly see. Like, first off, I think killing somebody and having them know for months and months is torture anyway. I'm fine with the state not condoning that. I think worse torture is having hours knowing you're going to die, but then inflicting large-scale pain on you for hours and hours. We say that, like, we don't think that terrorists should say be tortured to try and information out, and we think that would be really bad. In the same vein, we don't think that people should be tortured for hours and hours. We think it's very difficult for us to criticise other countries that use torture to say get information out of people or to kill people when we ourselves condone it. But okay, finally, a lot of the time when the death penalty is used, there isn't that much television in the case. When Troy Davis was killed, Amnesty International ran a massive, massive campaign in that he was most probably innocent. It was most probably a racist conviction, which happens really often in states in which the death penalty is used, because the whole judiciary is inherently racist. It's filled with like white men who like to think bad things about black people for whatever reason. We think that makes it inherently unfair. But these things don't get the sort of like exposure that they should do. You've now put it on prime-time television. People don't want to know who the hell that person was and what was the evidence that allowed them to be convicted. If there's like murky evidence around their case and it isn't 100% watertight, people are going to care about that. There's going to be programmes before and after the execution where people analyse what was the reasons this person was killed. What was it that led to that decision? And if they are being wrongly killed, it can at least help someone else not be wrongly killed later as citizens have a backlash and think it was wrong that that person was killed and hold their government to account. We think that this idea from Desi that like people should like talk about this in a more nuanced way within their governments, I don't really understand. Like governments are from what their people think. If their people are not properly informed and don't really understand the process they're going through, then that democracy isn't working properly, and we think that that's a harm. So for the fact that you get better executions at least, more likely to end executions and more likely to have more accurate executions when they happen, we beg you to propose.
House thanks the Deputy Prime Minister for her remarks and calls on the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the arguments against the motion.
I like how they spend 7 more minutes on telling us why the death penalty is horrible. So we still propose they should abolish it then. If that's what you want to do, then just abolish it. We are fine with that. If you want to show the whole horrors of the execution system right now, show a documentary where you make anonymous ideas. Show whatever you want, but don't make it public on prime time for everyone who is there, because we think that will just lead to more harm. And actually, you were acknowledging that as well. So basically, we will take you on your own metric once again. You were saying we want to say that we want to have less torture. That will be my first point: less torture. My second point will be, as Desi stated, dignity. And after that, I will talk a little bit more about henchmen. That might be a minor point, but still, we should cover it. Before that, I will make a media analysis, and the first thing is a short rebuttal. The rebuttal is basically, if the problem is finding a vein, then actually find better doctors, pay them better. And finding a way is usually not that hard, and that's not the whole horror of actually the execution, especially when we are talking about penalizing by poison. Then you usually have tranquilizers at the beginning, and if you want to show the wimmering of those people, then you shouldn't probably mute them. So the next idea is, if your problem is that we don't have the right drugs here, make a state-funded drug program to make them better, pay shitloads of money, we don't care about that. So if those are your problems and those are practical problems, solve them with money, we don't care if that's that important to you. Firstly, to the media analysis now. So media analysis is basically, who will watch this? The people who find this incredibly disgusting? Maybe one time, maybe 2 times to see that it's actually disgusting. Will they watch it every time this happens? Because we have plenty of executions. No, we will still have high rates and lots of people will watch it. We are pretty sure about that. But those won't be the people that think it's disgusting. Those will be the people who like it. Who are saying, those are mean people who killed other people, let them suffer. A justice system is not about revenge. It's about deterrence, yeah, but not about revenge. We shouldn't actually take all humanity of those people because we like it, because we like to see other people suffering. Your idea of revenge is just you like to see other people suffering, and this is joy, and this is just another word for the revenge you are using. We think this is necessarily a bad thing. The people who are somewhere in between, and this is the people you want to reach, those who either don't really like it, who are saying, yeah, we are not quite sure about the death penalty. They will see it and they will ask, what did this person do? Most of the coverage before that, we are pretty sure about that, will be about what these people did horrible things. Why is it justified to do this? This will be the coverage beforehand. Then you mute it, and then we will have perfect doctors who actually find a way, because we pay shitloads of money, as you wanted to, and it will be a slow death, which you don't even see, because these people probably already sleep, because they want to make it that television friendly. Or, if you have a higher rating for actually the cruel version, then it's even worse, because the people enjoy the cruelty in it, which we think is even worse. For my second point, namely dignity. Why is it important that we always treat human beings as human beings and don't dehumanize them? Yeah, we already had the idea of Holocaust. I'm sorry as a German to bring that up. But the first thing you are always doing if you want to go against minorities or any people, then it's actually saying those are not human beings anymore. We can do whatever we want with them. We can use all power we have. We can do horrible things with them because they did horrible things. And usually it's not just those people. It usually affects the minority they are in, their surroundings it affects as well. And this is usually how everything bad started, by taking away humanity of human beings. This is actually what keeps us together. What keeps the construct of human dignity is nothing but a construct that we keep absolute. We think it's absolute because this is how we can defend human rights. This is how we can defend that you must never kill another person, by saying this is just a thing that you don't do to a human being. And by making it worse and worse, and we are saying it's okay if the state is doing it partly, because we think deterrence and all those things might be fine as well, but we don't think you should make it enjoyable for people. And this is what you're doing. Next metric, torture. My next metric is actually what they are saying, and they were actually acknowledging that waiting hours before being executed is partly torture. These were her words. It's partly torture if you let people wait a long time before dying. Don't you think that it will be even worse if you are dying publicly, and you know that your whole family won't find a place in this country to live safely anymore because they need to be afraid that everybody saw this execution? Do you really think that is a good thing for this person? Don't you think that will even increase the suffering? People vomit before that, maybe not on television, maybe on television. But the thing is, they will be dehumanized, they wet themselves, and we don't think that is necessarily a good thing. It will make these people even suffer more. Of course, we think that an execution is a horrible thing for the person being executed. We agree with that. But why do you have to make it more horrible? Why do you have to make it more horrible for the family? Why do you have to make it more horrible for everyone? Yeah, tell me.
What is the incentive to put good doctors if it's hidden, if no one can see it, if it's not on television?
Money. We are saying if that's your problem, solve it with money. We don't care. If that's actually your problem, and what's the incentive? You are the fucking government. That's your job to do it better then, if that's your idea. So, the next idea is that we are saying it's torture. It's not just torture of the people who are living there, but torture of everyone around there as well. Why do you make the suffering worse? We don't see any reason. The next idea is the idea of henchmen. And this is the idea that you have two possibilities what those people will look like. Firstly, they will be perfectly trained doctors who do everything well, or they will be extremely cruel because you want to show the cruelty. Those are the two options you basically have. If you want to show the cruelty, then those henchmen will actually be perceived either as idols because they kill criminals cruelly, and that's perceived by some people as a great thing. We don't think this is a good thing. You should never actually idolize someone who is killing someone cruelly, because we think that is part of human dignity and a thing that keeps our society together. Or secondly, you might have problems with retaliation and revenge. If this person is part of a gang, part of a greater structure, then you might actually have a backlash against this person and he will be stigmatized as well. We think both things will happen at the same time. Some people will idealize this person, which we think is horrible, and on the other hand, we will have the people who actually are completely against this and will try to demolish their house, demolish their garden, and think of that. We think for both those things it's not a good thing for henchmen. What did we tell you in the end? We told you that you are more cruel than you need to be. And we don't see any reason why you need to be more cruel. You are cruel not just to the person who did horrible things, but you are cruel to the victims as well, because there are two possibilities. Either this criminal will still inflict guilt on them by saying, you are guilty for my death right now, and actually all of the nation will see that, or you will give them a chance to actually be mean to the victim for a second time. You're horrible to the family who had nothing to do with the crime of this person. You are horrible to them, and you give them never a chance actually to establish, to really live a life again. And all for an end that you could have more easily reached by just abolishing the death penalty if, as you say, it's morally wrong. If it's morally wrong to this government, maybe they should forbid morally wrong things. If they think that it's morally right or justified, then I think we have no reason to keep it safe.
We thank that speaker for his remarks and call upon the first speaker from the opposing government team. Here.
Thank you. As the Prime Minister said, death penalty, we in the government believe that death penalty is morally wrong. We're going to argue this from that basis, but also from the even-if case that we believe was morally right. This would be a good idea. So in both those cases, no matter what your stance is, you should side with us. We state that the three main reasons to have the death penalty is because you want deterrence, you want closure, and you want to send a moral message. This thing, we believe that on our side, we strengthen all those three areas, and I'll discuss those in 3 points. My fourth point will be about legitimacy, which extends upon what the government said and shows why the broader principle, why it's a good idea to show this, beyond the sort of mechanistic benefits it will have to the institution in general. Most of my rebuttal will be interwoven because it will directly clash with what the leader of the opposition said. I have some rebuttal for the deputy leader of the opposition. He said that waiting, because the waiting will be for a public execution instead of a private one, it will be more torturous to wait for this execution. But we already showed how there will be less likely to be torturous the actual execution, because it will be a cleaner process. And we believe that that weighs up for the potentially more torture waiting. We believe that even if that falls on the side of it being slightly more torturous during these waiting hours, we believe that all the other massive benefits that I will talk about in my substantial will weigh up that slightly increased harm. Secondly, you talked about henchmen saying that, oh, what are these people associated with execution, what about them? We think that's a minor point, that's not the main point about executions. We think we'll always be able to find people to do these jobs. If there's a problem with their identity, we can keep them secret. You know, historically they had a black hood on their heads. We can make something like that, perhaps. I'm sure we'll find a way. But we don't think that this is the most relevant point of this here. I mean, we already have executions as it is. Also, when it comes to dignity, we just want to point out that we do think that it's important to show images when it comes to things that are horrible, when there are consequences of the society we live in. And I'm going to that in my fourth point. So what is my 3 main first points? Those are about the 3 areas, and one is deterrence. And how does this strengthen deterrence? Well, first of all, who does these acts? Who does these acts that puts you on the death penalty? It's either an irrational act of emotion, like you kill someone you really hate, or you kill your wife, or you kill somebody because you just have a mental lapse and go crazy. But then you're found guilty, found sane enough to be killed, and you're put on death penalty, right? Those kind of people. But they do it are irrational acts, right? But seeing the execution itself puts another irrational, sort of visceral connection with the punishment. Instead of having something arbitrary, yes, I might get the death penalty for doing this, you've actually seen it, experienced it in some form, and you will know what the punishment entails. So that deterrence will counteract, or potentially counteract, the irrational thoughts you have in your mind. So that irrational fear will run against the irrational anger or whatever that fuels your illegal act. Secondly, we have those who kill rationally, like the mafia. And they live under death penalty right now from other mafia. But actually, they usually live under sort of escaping this death penalty. Our ignorance want to avoid it. If it's public, they are forced to encounter their potential execution and see it. And we think that's a good thing. They cannot just live in denial. So, you know, make them want to change their ways. And right now the mafia have the omerta, like, you know, I need honor and that sort of abstract thing within the family. But comparing that to what the actual execution will be like, then they'll have a reason to break it and go against it. Secondly, we think it strengthens closure. Why is that? Because the more public the judgment, the more people will know the story, right? And that's the most important for the victims. Take the idea if I'm bullied. And if I'm bullied and the teacher takes the bully and me out and makes the bully apologize to me in private, that might be a good thing for me. But it's a much bigger thing to me if the teacher takes the bully out to the front of the class and makes him apologize to me in public. Why? Because then everyone shares in my story of how I was the victim an idea to have closure for the affair. And they're saying, like, what if he makes a bad statement? Well, first of all, if the executioner makes a bad last word, like saying, oh, all black people are inferior, or something like that. Well, first of all, we'll get more sympathy for the victims. They'll see, yes, that was probably a bad guy. Secondly, we'll then get the last word by actually killing that person. So we think that we then send that message out, which comes to my third point, sends a moral message. And we think that we want to send out a strong signal, and that's why we say that these acts merit the death penalty. But by showing also the actual execution, we send out a stronger signal of saying, like, this is so wrong, look, this is a person who did it, here's him dying. We think that that absolutely sends the signal of how wrong it is and what the consequences can be literally understood through that visual reaction. That's the second.
Would you then also broadcast court processes?
Thank you. I think a lot of court processes are broadcast and are shown, but we definitely talked about, and we're going into this, it should be public or not, and we've also heard the sympathy for the victims' families. Well, court rulings themselves are public. And even so, in these countries that it is, which was already mentioned, the proceedings are usually public enough that, you know, newspapers print out the names of somebody who's not even convicted of the crime. And we think that the benefits here to society in general, knowing who the criminals are and knowing how that they get punished, is much more important than the families of the criminals. And we believe that the closure for the families of the victims is also more important and gains from that. Because victims usually want others to know what had happened, and families of victims want people to know who killed the person and have them see it, and so they can share with them how that person gets punished. So lastly then, into legitimacy. We believe that this is more legitimate. Now I'm going to make a Game of Thrones reference here. Ned Stark has a policy that if he executes someone, he has to do so himself. And we think that if a society should have a policy such as the death penalty, if they believe it to be wrong, they should bear the consequences on that penalty. And they're saying people have a gut feeling that it's bad. Well, the problem is, a lot of things can abstractly be rationalized as good, and have been historically. Colonialism, slavery, all the things that Germany did in the 30s. And we think that the gut feeling of actually seeing it will counteract some of this. We believe that if people have a gut feeling that it's bad, it might cause them to question the policies. And if not the death penalty itself, at least the practice as was talking about by Flores Scott. We believe that, for example, we don't see the slaughtering of a cow, so we're very much in favor of eating hamburgers all the time. But we don't think, and we don't believe their narrative that saying that just because we see this, it will brutalize society and people want more blood. We don't see this in general. As they said, most people, they've conceded, most people have seen at least one execution. And the people who dislike it a lot won't be the ones who be in favor of having a brutalized show, and will keep on voting in politicians who keep rules saying that cruel and unusual punishment should not be had. So what we're instead doing is saying that if we're going to have the death penalty, we should know what it is. And not just know abstractly, but know it on a deep, physical, emotional level. Why? Because it will strengthen deterrence, it will strengthen the closure for the victims, it will send out a stark moral message and give it legitimacy, and at least improve it until it does. So for all these reasons, we beg you to propose. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the member of government for his comments. The House now calls upon the member of opposition to start the case for the use of an opposition team.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Legitimacy certainly is a key point in this debate, and I'll develop further the issue of legitimacy and show you how this is actually going to lead to a fundamental legitimacy crisis of the justice system, how this is going to undermine institutional trust of the population into the criminal justice system. I will also speak about theatralizing criminal justice, making it to a piece of theater, dramatizing it. I will speak on instrumentalization as the key term, why this is not dignified, and I will maybe also speak a little bit about sending messages further. First, some brief points of rebuttal. Now, one of your ideas in second gov is that now we tell the story of the victims more openly, stronger than we did before, and finally the victims will get what they need, it is getting their story told. Now the opposite is true. We're telling a second story. The story, the immensely strong story of someone who publicly dies. There can hardly be a stronger story. Now, before execution were public, there is no such thing as an untold story. So the story of the victim did not have to compete to such a strong extent with the story of the criminal, of the man or woman who actually committed the crime. But now we have this image of a man or a woman being killed in public. And we will ask ourselves, now this man actually seems to have such strong convictions or such strong passions that he is willing to die for it, and that creates a whole new narrative of justification of what is actually going on with the perpetrator, and it actually defocuses the attention from the victim. It effaces the story of the victim, because usually we do not have television broadcasts of the horrible crimes themselves. Now, deterrence is another key term in crime imitation. Deterrence doesn't work for one key aspect with very violent, with capital crimes. Because murderers, in their unreasonable passions, have the expectation that they will not be caught. They have a biased evaluation of their chances of succeeding and getting away with the crime. So the message of deterrence does not come through to them. Now, why is it particularly immoral to have people look at the death of others, to have public executions? We say that the death penalty itself can be justified under a logic of proportionality. On the one hand, it's the crime that was perpetrated. You killed someone. So for that, you are also killed. It restores social justice. It brings the perpetrator back in a just order, which was disturbed before because he committed an injustice that was not sued. So in this moment, the perpetrator is still an end in himself, because the death penalty actually serves doing justice to him, not only the victim, but also to the perpetrator. Now that changes if you use public punishment for purposes other than those of the victim or the perpetrator. And what you want to do is to instrumentalize it for political aims, such as in your case, finally somehow abolishing the death penalty, or in your case, sending other political messages. It can also be an instrument for the pleasure, the sheer amusement of people, a kind of death toll. So we think in that moment, dignified dying, dignified capital punishment is no longer possible, because now the perpetrator is only the object of, let's say, public desires, public amusement, or a political cause. So that is unjust, yes.
The people who watch this will be, as you conceded, in the minority. They might be the viewers, but they're not the ones who dictate the terms of how the execution will be, which will still be the majority, quite disgusted with it, who are the voters.
That doesn't matter, but even if an execution just has the purpose of serving the disgust of some people, it still is an instrument. So that point does not matter. Now, secondly, why this is going to lead to a legitimate crisis of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice and justice system as a whole rests on a popular consensus on what is just and not. It works currently with the death penalty because we are not emotionalized to such a strong degree if we know that, or we don't know what is happening. But now we do it in public. So some people will be appalled, they will be disgusted. Others will be confused. Hey, he's dying. And this polarizes the public into one group of partisans who are strongly opposed to the death penalty, one group who are strong partisans of the death penalty, and because their sympathy or antipathy is not driven by arguments, but by emotions, that means that these people will no longer be able to have a debate, a discourse, and to find a consensus that must be there to legitimate the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system loses its legitimacy foundation, the public support for not only the penalty itself, but also the system that leads, that can possibly infringe such penalties on a person. That questions the whole system and endangers the institutional trust of society towards the state and obedience of the law and authority. Now, thirdly, this turns criminal justice, a criminal process, into a theatre piece. A public execution is the strongest possible endpoint of a narrative, of a drama, suddenly criminal justice gets an immense audience, and they know that possibly what is being played in the courtroom could have one end that we all consider the strongest from a theatrical point of view, which is the public death of an upright man in public. And that creates a desire to have this end. And then the judge, or let's say the jury, they do not only have to listen to the arguments, they are not only accountable towards, let's say, the witnesses, the defense arguments, the prosecution arguments, but they are not also accountable to the audience because they are on a scene, and they will feel a subtle but strong pressure to bend the arc of the criminal process towards the end, the most dramatic, the most theatrical end of it all, which is the public death. And for those reasons, I beg you, John.
Thanks very much to that speaker for his comments. The House now calls upon the final speaker of the government bench, the government whip.
Thank you. I'm going to sum this up on sort of a couple of things. Firstly, why we think that showing the consequence of action is good in general for society. And secondly, why specifically this strengthens the purpose of the death penalty and makes the death penalty system better. First, I have quite a few points to rebuttal. So, first of all, like they brought in a PY before, like this idea of like sort of why would we televise court processes or whatever, trials. I mean, that's a bit different because those are all people who haven't yet been found to be guilty, right? Most people might be innocent. We know that's not the same thing as when the process is over and the side has decided that someone's not only guilty but we're going to kill them. I think that's a very different situation. Secondly, we think, like, so harking back to the previous discussion on, say, the Holocaust, but even if you go to Cambodia, for example, they will show you these like mountains of skulls, right, from the Khmer Rouge genocide. We think that that's fundamentally a good thing. That shows very clearly how horrible this was. And if we also show, for example, pictures of mass graves from the Holocaust and so on, we do this because we want to remind people exactly of how bad people can be and how bad consequences certain things can be. We're finally standing for that. Then, like, we hear sort of from second op that it's problematic that there might be a narrative surrounding who the murderer was and, you know, what feelings they have and so on. I think, first of all, there seems to be a bit in tension with first op's idea about how we should care for the dignity of the perpetrator and so on. We also think that, yes, we're fine with the fact that if someone like is being executed for the wrong reason, or if there's like reason to care about the killer in this case, yeah, that's a good thing, right? We think that if it's like a justified execution, that won't happen. If it's an unjustified execution, it's a good thing that it happens. And I'm going to get to that more sort of in the substantial as well, right? Then they say that sort of this is problematic because we instrumentalize people. Now, we know that sort of this is a common sort of debater terms, right? You know, taking away their agency. We think at the point where we're killing them, we're taking away their agency in a very permanent fashion anyway. And we think like whether they're sort of a bit more like, you know, instrumentalized by the fact that we show it publicly is like a very, very minor harm, if any harm at all. I think we're not adding much, like adding insult to injury in this case is very, very minor. Then they say that like this might take away a consensus. Now again, yeah, we agree it might do that, but we think that a consensus based on a false view of reality, a consensus based on like not knowing the facts, not knowing the consequences of our actions, is not a particularly good consensus. So this leads to more people, for example, questioning the death penalty. Yes, that's fine by us, right? If we should question the death penalty when we see the consequences, then that is a good thing that it happens. If that doesn't happen, then that's also good, right? I mean, there's misleading and bad if it's based on the wrong reasons. Then finally, sort of, they talk about how this will somehow like affect the trials. Now, again, we say the same thing. Right? We think that it might lead to people being a bit more cautious when executing, for example, innocent people, because they might fear the backlash when people are aware of that. Again, we think that's probably a good thing. We think that when we execute people, that should probably have a pretty high bar. We're fine with that being an effect of this motion. In fact, we think it speaks in favor of the motion. Right. So going into the substantial, and thank you. So, firstly, why do you think the show cause are generally good, right? Well, we think that it leads to more legitimate decisions. We think that's good in and of itself. In a democratic society, we think that if people see the consequences, they get more grounded in them, they sort of are more willing to only support things that they actually do support, right? So we're saying in the beginning, in the transitional phase, people might see an execution and be like, oh my god, is that how horrible it is? Are they actually going to kill that person with those reasons, whatever? That might lead to a change in the law, then that won't happen. We think that once the outcomes are in line with what we want, that is a good thing, right? We take in sort of all the benefits and all the costs. That also says something about, this is like involved emotion and so on. But we think that if we buy like opposition's idea of respecting dignity and stuff, we think that like that argument doesn't really hold, right? We think that yes, it is a bit emotional to see someone die. We think that's fair. We think it is a big decision to kill someone. If we're sort of a bit emotionally involved in that, that's a good thing. We're showing them some respect for their life. We're saying we're not going to like very lightly execute someone. We're fine with standing for that. We think that's a really good right. No, thank you. So we also think that like already in the status quo, we'll, for example, be able to read usually grisly details of a murder, for example, or the violent rape that ended the murder and so on. We think that like what this does is it adds some of the negative consequences of executing someone. We think in the abstract, it's for people to say, look, this person should obviously be killed. He's a monster. Now we add the fact that, well, okay, maybe he's a monster. You already knew that, but this is how like bad it is to be executed. So we add something because we make it perhaps a bit more moderate, and we think that's something that is quite good. So what we're saying here is, like, we're willing to be a bit agnostic. Even if first government is wrong, we think they're right. But even if they are wrong on the death penalty being abolished as a result of this, even if that doesn't happen, because it's going to be more legitimate, which is like a good thing in itself. Like, when policy we have is going to be more legitimate, and we think it's probably going to be better. Because on average, it's going to sort of lead to people who deserve it more be getting it, and not people not deserving it getting it as much. Well, thank you. So. Secondly then, specifically when it comes to the purpose of death penalty, so we follow the motion, we assume the death penalty is there, we don't challenge it. So what do we have the death penalty for in the first place? We brought in three things in extension here, right? We said like we want deterrence, we want closure, we want to send a moral message. So what is the deterrence thing? Well, one of the goals of the death penalty is to deter people from crime. And then we say that making it more public makes it more visible. Showing the horrors more clearly leads to creating irrational fear. Right? So they say that people are like not necessarily, they can be biased, they don't necessarily act rationally. Sure, that might be true. But I say that when it comes to things like people being afraid of planes or sharks, this does the same thing. It counteracts the minimizing of consequences by the criminal, because it shows something very visible, something very tangible, something that will act as an irrational fear for them and exactly lead to that. I'll take it first.
We argue that giving people in a society dignity is the basis of democracy. Even if they are criminals, they have certain rights, even in prison. Even if you kill them, we have to do it in a dignified way. Peeing yourself in public. How is that dignified when you die like that?
Thank you. So, okay, we're saying that like we're not going to do horrible things to them. We're not going to put clown noses on them when we kill them. But I think at the point where you already accept that we can kill them, I think that this doesn't add very much tangible harm to them, right? That's the point here. So, secondly, when it comes to closure for the victims' families, this is like an important thing, right? So we say like, you get the feeling of being right, but sharing an experience with others makes it more valuable to you. Like, if only I know that I'm right, it's not worth as much as everyone knows. So that's why we debate in the first place, right? Because we like to be publicly acknowledged as being right in the argument. And we also think that sort of like, when it comes to things like victim blame, which might often be going on, because many crime victims might be, might be gang crime, it might be people who are like raped into death, where there might be victim blaming going on. When for society side on and say, look, we're going to execute this person because we agree with the victims. It's something that brings closure to the families of the victims, and that's something that's good, like sharing that moment of justice with other people. Finally, then, we think that we show very clearly what we think of a criminal by doing this. So the state makes a moral stand. We say this is a moral message we stand for. If you do this kind of crime, we're going to execute you, and we proudly stand up for that message. And we say again, like, by doing that, we make it more certain that the times when we do it are going to be times where we are genuinely sure that this is what we believe. And within the fundamental side of it, they show very minor harms, like families of criminals, maybe to criminals who were already killing, like to criminals whose identity we already revealed, so the families already have to live with that burden. We think like these things are very, very minor compared to the things that we bring you on proposition about how it makes it more legitimate, more democratic, and make death penalties more sort of targeted to people we actually want to execute, and strengthen all the purposes of the death penalty. So we're very proud to stand in proposition. Thank you.
Thanks very much to that speaker, and the vote of the government bench. The House now calls upon the final speaker from the opposition.
Madam Speaker, this debate was about very fundamental questions of our legal system. Basically, why do we punish? When do we punish? How do we decide how to punish? How do we punish? And we think on opposition side that the state takes on an enormous responsibility by claiming the right to punish people, to judge people, to punish people, and in the case of this debate, even to kill people. And we think that this claim requires an enormous and a very careful legitimization. The state has to make a couple of very delicate promises when he takes on that responsibility. These promises are basically to keep politics out of the legal process, to keep dignity in the legal process, and to keep emotions out again. And we say that the proposal we hear on government side breaks all these promises, and that by breaking these promises it will undermine the trust in the legal system, and it will undermine the consent that people have to the legal system. And we think that all these things that closing just told us, that things have to be legitimate, that they have to be democratic, which we all agree, they will be lost if this basic consent is undermined. If people are not able any longer to say, well, if I might be in court in 5 years down the road, I trust that the judgment that will be made upon me will be fair and legitimate. First point that I said is, don't politicize. We think it's very important to keep politics out of the process. And let's just play out the scenario of First Prop, because they explicitly want to politicize the thing. Yeah? They want to make this part of political debate. Now, they say, well, people will be abhorred and there will be a political effect. And there will be questions down the bench was, well, why don't you just propose the political effect that you want to obtain in the first place? Why do you need this strange backdoor strategy? However, what we also hear from Kai is that not everybody will be abhorred, but that some people will actually enjoy these broadcasts. So what we get here is, of course, a conflict between them. Yeah? We get a polarization about the legal system. Even in a very polarized society as the United States, at the moment, it's still possible that people, for example, trust the judgments of the Supreme Court, because, no, even the healthcare ruling of the Supreme Court, very polarized society, people say that. Why is that? Well, because this process is not politicized. Because we do not elect the judges. It is because we do not use this whole process to achieve political goals. And that's exactly what you try to do here. And by the way, also the criminal, of course, can use it for a political statement. We on closing don't think that the big problem is that the criminal will joke about the victim, but we think the criminal will make, I think that's an important point, but the even more important point is that it will use that as a political demonstration, yeah? By choosing a certain type of clothing or whatever. We will create martyrs for political movements here. Now secondly, the emotional thing. Emotions have also to be kept out of this. They say, well, people need, the government in particular, closing, believe that we can only make informed decisions if we see the full horrors of something. We say, if we see the full horrors of something, we make an emotional decision, because the horrors do not speak to our brain, they speak to our stomach. And we think that legal decisions should not be made based on stomachs, but on brains. We think that cold blood is very important in court. And here comes the very important point that Philip made. Because if we have this very, very strong theatrical event at the end of the process, potentially, it will be very tough for the judge to keep cold-blooded. It will be very tough for him to rely entirely on facts if he has a screaming mob out there who demands the head of the perpetrator. We think that is the reason why we keep television out of courts, because we do not want to emotionalize the process. And exactly the same thing has to happen here. We have to make decisions in court based on cold blood, and we have to make decisions about the law based on cold blood. And that's why we should keep this very strong emotional impetus out of the thing. I take closing.
You're acting as if in the status quo there are not a lot of political pressure or politicized trials. That's clearly not the case. There's a lot of that going on in the status quo, especially when it comes to like the US with like allegations about racial decisions, for example.
We think this is a very big problem. We should try to minimize this as much as we can. This is why I say, well, we don't elect judges, for example. We don't want them to be responsive to the public. We want them to be responsive to the law. Now, third point, what has to be kept in if politics and emotions are kept out? What has to be kept in is dignity. Or to take Philip's terms, we don't want to instrumentalize people there in court. And we, by the way, think that this is actually what torture is about. In torture, you instrumentalize someone. You treat him as a tool to obtain information. And what you want to do here is to treat these perpetrators as tools to obtain a political result. You treat them as the emotional hammer to drive your nail into the wall, which is getting rid of death penalty in case of first prop, which is some other stuff in case of second prop. In both cases, still, by broadcasting it, no thank you, by the decision to broadcast, you say, we are not anymore in the realm of punishing him for what he did. Now he is taken as an instrument to achieve very different goals. If you think that logic to the end, for example, well, you should decide the broadcasting time by what else is going on television. Yeah? You maximize your effect if you avoid dates where there is an important football match at the same time, because people will not watch them. We think here this is the total undignization. You take the dignity away of these people. In German you can always just add syllables, then you get new words. So here you take the dignity of these people that we still accept when we, that is what Philip explained, we still accept this fundamental dignity as humans in the case of the death penalty when it's anonymous and when it's not broadcast to the public. This you take away. You make it a public event, you make it a tool, you politicize it, you bring emotions in. For all these reasons, we think this is a very, very, very dangerous road to go, because in the end it will undermine the trust in the legal system. And if people cannot trust it, they will not trust the rulings, and then we have much bigger problems. Thank you very much.